So, we're here today to talk to you about the bubble. As you can see over my shoulder, the bubble is something that's being used across the country for many of the professional sports teams, the best of which right now, and the numbers prove it out, they are the best, is the NBA. The NBA is doing some great things with the bubble concept. They've partnered with the Walt Disney World down in Florida, in Orlando, Florida. It's a great thing. I mean, games are being played. Competition is awesome. If you've been watching any of the NBA, you're noticing some hustle, some determination, some commitment to the game. It's really, really good stuff to see happening. It's good to be with you today. This is 360 Performance. I'm your host, Dr. Lowell Whiteman, coach to many out there. We're here every Friday at 11 a.m. streaming on KUHSdenver.com. Glad to have you with me. Today we're going to have a great special guest. She'll be joining us shortly as she gets off a call with government officials about the naming of teams in high school sports and what's appropriate. Well, we're not going to talk so much about that as we're going to talk about what it means to have a bubble and who has a bubble right now. Well, we know, as I just said, the NBA has a bubble, but that's a physical space. They've worked with Disney World to actually create a physical space that is protected. You know, you've got redundancies on entry, you've got name badges and security passes, which are not uncommon, but these security passes probably have a little bit more segregation of who's in and who's not. Like, for example, if you're an assistant to the media, you're probably not going to get back to the locker room area or the staging area with the players, where in the past you may have had access to do that. Well, now you've got to get tested, or you should have been tested before you even came into the facility, because maybe your pass doesn't allow you, only allows you into the bubble to watch the games, but not to stay in the bubble. Well, there's also other aspects of the bubble, which is virtual. As I've shown you right here, that the NFL has now started to share training agendas, and that's called NFL 11 Online. 11 Online, and they're working with Nike and Nike training programs, and they've got Nate Burleson. Nate Burleson is an announcer for the NFL as well as for network television with CBS, and they're sharing this information with kids about training. Well, they could do that anywhere. It's a virtual bubble. Now, I say that, but I'm going to give you some more details about that virtual bubble criteria as we get guidelines from the CDC. And everybody knows about those guidelines. You know, you wash your hands, you make sure you have 6 feet of distance minimum, and if you're within 6 feet, make sure you don't stay with that person or persons more than 15 minutes. The least of that amount is better if you have to be within 6 feet for a moment or so. But you're going to wear a mask. Wearing your mask. Put your mask on. Do what's necessary to stay safe and to keep other people safe. Now, with that being said, the NFL is doing a great job of trying to bridge the gaps. Now, other sports programs are also doing that. You've got colleges all over the country reaching out to their communities. You've got the players for football that are at preseason camps. They've been there for a while. In the next few weeks, you're going to see more and more players. The freshmen that did not participate in summer workouts, they didn't take classes, they weren't working out during the preseason workouts, they're now going to start arriving on campus. For many conferences, they've all changed as far as when their start dates are, but they're going to start. Now, I'm almost certain there's uncertainty. Now, when we talk to Rhonda Blandford Green, we're going to talk about 2 things with her. Not only how to prepare and create those bubbles, if you will, but also to talk about what sports are going to play and what sports are not going to play. Now, with the professional systems, you've got a number of sports that are playing. So let's answer that question a little bit. Who is playing? Well, we got leagues and we got where. And the where and the league has a direct connection, because some leagues haven't even started yet. That's the NFL. But those who have started, like the NBA and the WNBA, they got their bubble. They're down at Disney World, and they've created as well. The WNBA has the IMG facilities down in Bradenton, Florida, but the setup is similar as far as it's a closed system. You enter with credentials. If you have certain credentials, like coaches and players, obviously they go the full distance with where they're staying and the locker rooms, the practice facilities, and what have you. Not everybody else that has credentials has the same kind of clearance, because they more than likely are not staying on site. So there's bubble access and there's bubble you stay accessed. So the WNBA and the NBA have similar scenarios. So when we extend that to other leagues and sports, Major League Baseball, they have their setup of a bubble. Well, it's their stadium. I don't know if you noticed on ESPN the other day, there was a foul ball that was hit, as foul balls get hit. And I don't remember the team is. I want to say it was maybe the Texas Rangers that were playing. And they put these really large stuffed bears in the stands. And one of the bears, that line drive, swinging hook line drive out of bounds, just clocked that bear right square in the middle of its faux head and knocked it over. It was I guess you had to be there. It was a funny moment. But that being said, they have their stadiums, they've got their placards of pseudo fans, they pipe in music. I can tell you that the stadiums themselves do create a bubble, but here's a thing that's interesting, and it's going to come up in some of the CDC guidelines I'm going to mention to you that sports teams need to be aware of. And that's when you travel, you're going to travel from a place to another place, right? So they've got a reduced schedule, so the exposure of MLB teams to other cities, people, and teams that they're going to play is going to be not as great as it would be for the regular season. Well, that's a good thing, but not such a good thing. So Major League Baseball is doing their best at the bubble that teams enter into. Now, what would be ideal from the National Health Institute's point of view is that those teams that come in to play another team would have a number of days, ideally 14, because who knows where they've been, 14 days of quarantine before that series of games, 3, 4, whatever it is. And they're playing more than double headers. They're playing, in many cases, 4-game series or more when teams come into town. So that would be the ideal thing. You come into, let's say, the Yankees come into town to Denver to play the Rockies. The Yankees would have come into town, had a 14-day quarantine, checked everybody out, made sure everybody was healthy, no asymptomatic indicators, and off they go. They're not doing that, but I can tell you this from experience and from asking questions of the Rockies and other teams around the country, they're doing a pretty good job with creating their bubble and making sure that not only masks being worn, so if you're and cleaning and disinfecting and what have you in the locker rooms and the spacing of lockers and all that type of thing that I shared with you last week regarding the NFL, they're doing their job. Now, that being said, watch Major League Baseball when they have shots of the dugout, and you're going to see players with their masks on, and they're wearing them appropriately and properly. Well, in addition to Major League Baseball, you have the National Hockey League. Well, they have a similar scenario because teams go to the visiting team ices to play. Now, those stadiums are being dealt with quite nicely as well. So you've got them making an effort, them being the professional teams making an effort to protect themselves, to be safe, and follow the CDC guidelines accordingly. Now, PGA, LPGA, they've been playing for a while. They're outside. And if you notice, no fans are let in. I've talked to some golfers, on the professional circuit, both women and men, and some of them like it. The fan situation is improved many players' games. Now, I could take umbrage to that because when the fans are there and it bothers the golfer, they call me to help them work through with that frustration. Well, I guess I could get irritated about it, but I'm liking the fact that they're actually playing. So I'm gonna take that one for the team. So also notice that when they pan around, the Wyndham tournament recently in the PGA was near a resort center. So there were some fan chairs out. The people were at the Wyndham resorts and they sat on the side, masks on, so they got a privilege to enjoy the golf that others would not because tickets weren't being sold. But some of those golf holes came close enough to the common area of the Wyndham Hotel Spa that, patrons are able to see the golf outing. Now, that being said, I compliment the PGA, the Golf Channel, CBS, any channels and networks that pick up and carry the action are doing what they need to do in staying socially distanced, wearing their masks, and I'm sure that they're taking precautions to clean up what needs to be cleaned up. So that's the PGA. Well, as we wait for Rhonda Blandford-Green to join us this morning, I want to make sure that you know that high schools all over the country are having a difficult time managing their it's a tough situation because the facilities that they are using, they haven't yet allowed or notified the fans, parents, moms, dads, schools, administrators, coaches where they can play safely. Now, if we were in the winter time with basketball, wrestling, volleyball, or the end of volleyball season, the indoor sports basically, we would have to have a fairly detailed discussions. Well, they're having those discussions now. Golf has been out. I've actually been on golf courses in the not too distant past and seen teams come up, unload their vans, masks are on, they're bringing their own equipment. Baseball, softball has been playing. If they have fall baseball, I'm talking about teams I've talked to around the country. And speaking of, good morning, Rhonda. Perfect timing. Perfect timing. Do you have your microphone on?
Who, me?
Yeah, you. There she is. Good morning to you.
Oh, are there slides up or something?
Yeah, I've got some slides up. I was going through the show this morning, and I'm gonna swap the display and bring you in with us, and so you can see what's going on. So, Rhonda, you've got perfect timing because I'm talking about the circumstances that you find yourself in, along with executive directors all over the country, making decisions about who plays and who doesn't, and more importantly, where they play and how well prepared is it. Today's theme for me is bubble. Can we create bubbles like the NBA has created? Can we create circumstances and situations like what they have with the NHL, Major League Baseball? It's just a very interesting scenario that you find yourself in. It really is interesting to me. So what are the decisions you've been making to make it safe? I mean, softball's been out and golf's been out. What's the status for the future coming into the fall and winter as it relates to CHSAA and Colorado sports?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. Obviously, high school athletics and activities touch every part of the state of Colorado, right? We have 363 member schools, 178 school districts, and probably over 180,000 students that participate in our 29 programs that are sanctioned through the CHSAA office. And I'll start off with talking about the bubble mentality, right? It's very hard for that to happen because we are educationally based.
Yeah.
Our athletics and activities are the complement to the classroom. And so in trying to put together a safe resumption, right, we shut down in March with basketball, and then slowly kind of put everything off until we were given a directive from the state department or the state governor's office that spring sports would be shut down. And so we've just really been trying to put in a resumption plan, or it finally was approved, a plan to resume sports. We started off with actually 4 sports. Golf was the first sport. It started on time because obviously it meets all guidelines, whether they're the national guidelines or the state guidelines with social distancing, the ability to spread out, capacity limitations for spectators. It's an outdoor sport. And then we were given the go-ahead through the governor's office to implement softball and golf. Again, the opportunity to potentially have all of the safeguards and the guidelines put into place. And on the last day prior to him approving the full calendar, we were allowed to have cross country. And cross country went through several layers of vetting and multiple plans to ensure our state, infectious disease groups that we could put on an event, because we were asking for an expansion of the guideline numbers per racers on a course at one time. And so it's really been a challenge because we have over 53 county health departments with different ideas about what should be implemented in their county. And I think when our public sees, well, they're allowed to do that over here and they're not allowed to do it, why is CHASA making this more regulatory than when I go to my kids' baseball, summer game? And it's because we are educationally based, and we cannot undo what our superintendents and what our educational leaders are doing to return to learn. And so it can't be guidelines in place from 7:30 in the morning until 3, and then the bell rings and all bets are off and we're playing football and volleyball and all of those things, because we undermine that. And so it has been a challenge to meet all the different expectations across the state, and then having also national guidelines, which it really has been. But I feel very, very excited and about being in a place where we weren't this spring, where we are getting our kids back on the field, and we are supporting the socialization and the connections and the mental health that we know participation in athletics and activities brings to our kids.
Ronnie, you said some really important things that I want to make sure our audience gets an emphasis on, and one of those was student athlete. With the pandemic, the student part, to your point about participation and the academics, that's the emphasis, because when you have the two together, it makes it very difficult for you as an executive director to create guidelines for both. So it's the student first, and making sure that they get served a great education. And regretfully, some of the sports are going to have to take a back seat until we can properly adjust and adapt to what the COVID virus has created for us. Is that a pretty good summarization?
Yes, that is a great summarization. Again, it's been a learning experience to have teachable moments with our public about what CHASA is. We are not recreation, we're not club, we're not youth sports. We are an extension of 363 member schools' academic vision. And so we have to work around, and as you know, if you're following anything, if a parent or the return to learn plans have evolved, they could be, we're going 100% in person on a Monday, and then the following Monday you receive a memo that, okay, now we're going to do a hybrid model. We're going to go Mondays and Wednesdays in person, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays and Fridays we're distance learning. And then you will get a memo that says, okay, we've made the decision that we're not coming back the first semester, or we're not coming back until October. And so you think you have to work around. Now, if we had indoor sports right now, we would be asking our schools to open up their buildings that they're not even opening up to their students to have a sporting event. And you're talking about sanitation guidelines, you're talking about additional personnel, about transportation, all of the things that they've put on hold until they got a handle on where we were within the coronavirus or COVID, and we just can't undermine decisions that are being made by our educational leaders, our Colorado Department of Education as well, and the infectious disease doctors that are providing us with data points to make these types of decisions. So yeah, absolutely. It's not that we're making the final decisions. At the end of the day, the governor's COVID response team approved the calendar for the 2020-21 school year. Competitive season. Shasta has made some major revisions in terms of expanding our competitive season that normally ends early into May, early June, and we're going all the way to January 26th, or June 26th, knowing that if we have to push back some of these seasons, that we could effectively in our competitive season into July. So we're going to do what it takes to make sure that our kids have the opportunity to have a season, and crossing our fingers that it can culminate into a state championship opportunity. But we're better positioned now to be proactive than that we were when the first cases came out, and we were all being reactive. And so I feel like we are in a win-win situation. My favorite word now is we are in a forced normal. This isn't a new normal. Well, usually when you say new, you get a new car, you get a new house. It's a celebration. We are in a forced normal situation where we're being forced to make decisions in the best interest of our kids, but then trying to navigate around a health crisis and a pandemic that hasn't just stabilized itself, that we can say, okay, we're at point A, we're moving to point B, and then C. Somehow we get to C and we take steps back and have to wear masks indoors, and certain guidelines are being placed around businesses. And so those things trickle down to the decisions that we have to make.
Rhonda, do we have a special, I call it special because I want to keep a positive thought on it, about what we say to parents? Because, I mean, look, at your message is out there, and yet not everybody's heard it because they don't want to hear it. They want their kid to play. They want their kid to compete. So what do you, other than the CDC guidelines as a repetitive mantra of what to do, what are some of those phrases and thoughts and feelings you're trying to share to moms and dads about what's going on? Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. The number one thing is that kids won't play. I think that's where we go to, is your kids won't play. It might not be in their traditional seasons. It might not be in the way that we've done it for 100 years, right? Because we're celebrating our 100th year anniversary. But your kids will play. And what that means is that we're going to position ourselves in the best place through this calendar to start a season, to have a regular season and playoffs and a culminating event. And so I don't know if there's anything more that needs to be said. Because if you talk to the parents, that students did not have any opportunities this spring because of a full and complete shutdown, I think we have a beacon, we have a light of hope that there will be participation. And so I guess you just have to embrace that this isn't just about Shasta. Our whole lives have been disrupted. The things that we're used to doing in our everyday lives, whether that's grocery shopping or going to the movies or jumping on a plane, we're all having to navigate around the pandemic that's impacting more than athletics and activities. We're a small microcosm of what's going on in our world right now.
So let's talk about what the facilities need to look like for the future. Are we going to continue with some components of the CDC guidelines for the bubble concept for cleaning and sanitation and wearing masks when we get to that point, or are we just going to wait until COVID is gone?
No, I mean, none of us have the ability to offset the CDC guidelines, our state guidelines, the health guidelines, everything that we do, everything that our schools need to do, is what transfers over into athletics. And so CHASA's not putting out any, I mean, other than we have, you know, temperature checks for practice and things, you know, guidelines put in place, signage, all of those things that we provided the resources. But at the end of the day, this isn't about athletics as much as it is about your facilities and the guidelines that are put in forth by CDC, right? And the Colorado Department of Health. Our schools have to meet those standards, and when they're meeting those standards, then it transfers over into an athletic event. So any common places that students or the public would touch is a requirement to make sure that those are sanitized, but we're not putting out any additional sanitation guidelines that aren't already out there for what you should have in a classroom, what you should have in a weight room. The capacity limitations are upheld because the state has already set those guidelines. So what we're saying basically is we all have to work within those guidelines, and anything that we advocate for through the governor's COVID response team to increase the number of participants and all of those things don't diminish the safety guidelines that need to happen for a public facility.
So let me play devil's advocate as if I was a coach of a sport. So I know that the fall sports have been pretty much deferred to the future. We're going to move those, like wrestling, football, volleyball, those have all been pushed forward to the future, right?
Right, correct.
So if I'm a wrestling coach, what do I need to know once I can put kids on the mats to perform? Are there any new considerations? Are they going to still maintain bring your own equipment kind of standards? You know,
right. Every sport has a template. We have general guidelines for just resuming sports, right? So that's across the board for sports and activities for all 29. So we created general guidelines from all of the different resources that are out in the public, whether that's from CDC, Colorado Department of Health, the National Federation of High Schools, the NCAA. So it's just a document that we have taken some of the best practices from the experts out in the field to create guidelines for all 29. Then there will be, as there was with softball, the introduction of golf, where the assistant commissioners in our office put together specific guidelines for resuming those sports. And so those guidelines are communicated through Zooms, they're communicated, and so we're just in August, and we're looking at the implementation of Quadrant B in January. So yeah, absolutely, those guidelines and the communication and the direction of one-on-one communication and onboarding of how this should look happens with each one of the sports before they resume and their season starts.
So where's the best place for moms, dads, and coaches to go to keep up with the development towards 2021 and beyond?
Well, I think that if you're talking about immediate sports that are in place right now, you can always go to CHASA now and look at the bulletins. I think that Ryan Casey has done a great job. He's our director of IT and oversees our social media and our social media platforms. And he uploaded the activities calendar as soon as it was approved by the governor, and we communicated with our member schools. The governor did a press conference, and then we followed after. It was kind of a coordinated conversation and dissemination of information out to the public. But CHASA Now is probably your best resource for any updates or anything that would occur. And then if you're that interested in how implementation is going to happen, you can always go onto our website and click the sport that you want to see, because that's where our brackets are once we get into those different groups. RPI ratings of where schools are ranked going into the state playoffs. So CHASA Now is probably the one-stop shop, and then Ryan does a series of Q&As Right now, I think on the CHASA Now, there's a spirit Q&A of the most frequently asked questions. There's a football Q&A. I think there's even a basketball and volleyball Q&A. So we're pretty transparent in terms of relevant information that needs to be out to our public and membership. And, we learned to be more guarded after releasing some additional information, which, social media said, oh, CHASA is holding it close to the vest. And after the release of some pretty general information that set the public, into maybe having some opinions about things that we didn't even have control over, we were more measured in what we needed to put out to our public, no different than a superintendent or a governor or anybody making these types of decisions. It's never unilateral. But when the information comes out, we want it to be as definitive as possible to not cause confusion, not only with our coaches and our membership, but with the parents and the public. I think that is so important in this chaotic time to not just react to people's requests for every detail, because we've all seen since March what that does to have 5 or 6 different opinions and information out there, and you just don't know. So we're very measured with what we put out to our public.
Rhonda, is it chasanow.org or .com?
It's I think it's CHASA Now. I think if you just Google CHASA Now, it comes up and it'll lead you to the website.
All right. And I have personally gone and seen the chat sessions in the different sports. And I've also been approached by parents, administrators, and coaches around the country. And there are some of them out there that want to know about implementation. They're that analytical about the process. So you're doing a great job addressing all the different nuances of opinions and thoughts from those that will approach you. As you know, I've not been in your position, but I've been close enough to what you do to know that it's a challenge to answer and handle all the voices that come to you with their varied and diverse opinions about how is Johnny or Jilly being treated, and why can't they be out there competing against their friends? And now we've got the pandemic to amp that remark up a few notches. So where I want to take you now, Rhonda, is the facilities themselves. You've got lots of great support with that when we get to that point where you can actually occupy them and participate in them. The question I have for you now is, what, if anything, does CHASA recommend to teams and coaches while they're waiting? The student part is self-evident. They're going to go to classes in whatever form that takes, virtual or butts and chairs. But on the prep, because now they've got a great chance to prepare and get stronger, faster, and healthier. What, if anything, does CHASA do in participating in that dialogue with coaches in sports?
Okay, so our bylaws are already in place for out-of-season participation. So the mindset of our coaches and our student athletes is they're in out-of-season mode, right? Okay. And so they're allowed to have open gyms, they're allowed to have weight training, everything needs to be voluntary, and you can't have contact on Sundays, so nothing has changed in that. But our schools are absolutely aware of what out-of-season participation, because even in normal times, our basketball programs aren't playing right now, so they know what the parameters are for being able to stay connected to their student athletes. There's only 3 sports right now that are probably not in their traditional season that are finding ways. I have to give a shout out to our coaches, because they're the ones that are now living their true why, right? Because we're not about state championships. We're about, the majority of our schools don't make it to the state championships. There's probably, you could probably go down the list and see that there's probably 10 to 15% of our schools that tend to get to the big show on a continuous basis. We always have the Cinderella stories, right? Those are the ones that make your heart happy. And so the majority of our schools have learned how to create positive experiences around not having a state championship. And so they have just stepped up their games across the board. I'm telling you, it all goes back to being completely shut down in the spring when our kids couldn't even have contact over Zoom with their coaches, right? Because they didn't want to put pressure on kids. And so I think right now we're in a celebratory mode, is that our coaches are having contact with our kids. The kids are having practices with their teammates, and it's not how we would all want it to resume, but at least we're not where we were this spring, and we are able, and our coaches are able, and our local school districts are able to support the physical, the social, the mental well-being of our students, and really truly that's what we're about. It's about participation and making it to the playoffs and all of those other things that tend to be a conversation. They're icing on the cake, because again, the majority of our schools maybe have not even been to a state championship in 20 years. So their communities have figured out how to make this experience positive without that carrot potentially at the end.
So with that focus on positivity, which as long as I've known you, it's always been part of your makeup, and extending that to the parents, the coaches, the administration is commendable. Where does the club sport slice fit into that positivity and that preparedness? Because now they can practice, they can do voluntary practice according to the bylaws of CHASA. Where does that club sport element fit into that process for you in CHASA?
We're probably one of the few states in the nation that allow club participation during the regular season. So it's not really about whether or not they have the opportunity to participate in club, but clubs have scheduled their seasons around the traditional high school season, right? So kids haven't had to make that choice. With the change in the calendar, definitely a small percentage, because again, we go back to 180,000 students. Decisions are made for big picture, right? So when you only have about 8% or 6% of your students that participate in club, you don't revise schedules around the choices that they will have to make, right? So they haven't had to make much choices, because everybody has been able to work collaboratively. The high school season ends, you transition into your club. And so that was a news focus for a while. But I think there is a level of tone deafness that a choice is going to have to be made when the majority of our student athletes don't have access to club programs, right? If you're living in the outer lying areas, the border schools, our rural schools, and then you don't have maybe the financial means in the metro area. We were early on, why can't you put volleyball into season B? And you have to remind people that we do have rural schools within the state association, that their population is maybe 50 to 150 kids. They can't sustain a basketball season and a volleyball season in the same quadrant. And so you have to make sure that you strategically place those opportunities. Would you rather have someone making a decision between high school and club, or whether or not to even have a high school program because of the student population that serves that particular school? And so as much as it is not, again, I go back to our forced normal, as much as it's not the norm, and we would hope that kids wouldn't have to make decisions, the calendar protects our rural and small schools that just don't have that population or accessibility to a choice.
You know, I like the fact that you're talking about the adjustments that communities are making to the situation, and especially your reference to, you know, they may have not ever, if not a long time ago, participated in a championship event. So preparation and participation is more of an emphasis than you're still going to compete, but you aren't going to compete at that level of championship quality, because it's just the nature of the community. But you're also talking about activities. It's CHASA. You're talking about activities. And so I'm wondering about the other side, the non-athletic part of what CHASA does, and if you're seeing an increase in participation of that, and perhaps a shift of the athlete into drama and speech and student government or cheerleading. I mean, there's still a lot of stuff to cheer about. You could still be fairly active in those areas. So what are you seeing in the activity side of CHASA?
Right. Well, the hybrid models of learning has impacted activities because they are indoor, whether it's music, whether it's speech, whether it's student leadership. And so they're on hold because they don't have the facility or again, I go back to it, they're not going to open their doors for an activity event if they're not opening their doors to in-person learning, right? So they are on hold right now. And I was on the Channel 9 town hall last night, and the question was brought up about football. And I can know that we have more participants in our music programs across the state of Colorado, also vying for scholarships at the collegiate level, than we do any other participation event in CHASA. So music supersedes basketball, football, volleyball, track and field. And so we are an activities association, and we do put emphasis on that. Right now, it's not able to be done because it is an indoor, and I want to stress this, there's a band masters where it's not sanctioned by CHASA, but it's a national organization that sets up the opportunities for bands to conduct their routines, and they practice all summer for that, and that was canceled this fall, canceled early this fall. So you had all band kids across the nation, no matter what state, and maybe they did it in other states, but I know in Colorado it was canceled. And so our activities kids are being just as impacted. And even now, you wouldn't even have the opportunity to advocate for them because of the hybrid models of distance learning, and we can't have a small percentage in the building and a small percentage that can't even get into their school building. So they're on hold until probably quadrants B through D.
Now, Rhonda, here's my creative mind going off into some tangent because I love the drumline competitions. So could we have a virtual drumline competition? Could we just spread it out on a football field and just virtually project it and compete? Is that possible? I'm just so anxious to see something and hear something and to celebrate these kids and how tenacious they are in being so patient.
Yes, and you know what? We don't sanction the band masters or the drum lines or anything like that. Our music sanctioning is within, whether it's choir, whether it's orchestra, whether it's band, and we usually conduct that in the month of April. And so I think when you say that, to me, I'm thinking the people who do band masters and do sanction those events, they need to step out of their comfort zones, right? And create something like a drumline event. I love drumline, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we're all trying to do. And when you think about, some of the things I heard from band masters, right? There's a transportation. You're talking about 100 kids, in a band. And so now, with all the CDC guidelines, the Department of Health guidelines, CDE guidelines about transportation and students being on a bus in an enclosed area, now you're probably talking about maybe, I don't know, I'm making this up, but 6 buses to get one band team. And so now we're talking about finances, and now we're talking about coverage on each one of the buses. So sometimes it's not because you don't have the desire to make something happen. There's a trickle-down effect of looking at all the different nuances that would have to be put into place for that one event to happen. And our schools have to look at the financial implications. They have to look at the safety implications right under the current guidelines. And so I think it's important it's easy to say, let them play or let them do this, but there has to be a lot of checkpoints and a lot of, especially in the midst of a pandemic, that we aren't putting our kids into unsafe environments, and our emotions and desires sometimes have to be secondary to making sure that if there's a resumption of any of these events, that all of the boxes are marked to make sure they're safe.
the resumption that word keeps revolving in my head, because our kids are influenced by many things. We're a socially active, both mentally and physically. We look at our phones, we look at our computers, and with the changes and positive changes, I mean, the NBA is a great example. They haven't had any kind of negative impact as far as the numbers going up with their testing. Their bubble is intact. The WNBA is an equivalency of that. So how are those images and those participations of play and the resumption of play by the pros influencing anything you're hearing from kids, coaches, administration? Is it a good thing, or is it kind of a gnat buzzing around your head going, I love what you're doing, but stop influencing my kids?
No, I think that anybody who understands the structure, the resources, the ability to implement certain things at different levels, right? Mm-hmm. We're not even in the same ballpark. Our kids go home to their parents. Our kids go to church. Our kids go to grocery stores. There's no opportunity to bubble high school participants. You're talking about 26-year-old men versus a 14-year-old that has to be under the guidance of their parents and sleep at home and live their lives. And so there's really no comparison. I don't feel any pressure from what's being done successfully at the professional level or even at the NCAA level, because we're all in our own space about how we can quarantine or isolate the athletes, and obviously you see that several football conferences have said, you know what, it's impossible to do that, and then you have some that are saying, you know what, we're going to try it. So I think we all have to stay focused on our own standards within our state, what we are being given by our state officials, by our health officials, to do what we need to do for interscholastic participation. So I don't feel any types of pressures to emulate what's being done in Kansas versus what's being done by the Nuggets. So we just have to, our bylaws and our structure of interscholastic participation has been set, and then we just have to work around those parameters.
I like the two disciplines that you mentioned, which need to carry on to other people's minds, their ears and their minds, about discipline, about the criteria, and more importantly, what you said about we're different. Colorado is not the same as Kansas, and is not the same in the slices of the NBA versus the NFL versus CHSA in those respective states. And your point that you made about family, and that a 14-year-old versus a 26-year-old has mom and dad. They go home to their bed with mom and dad and grandpa and grandma. We've seen far too many examples across the country about when child goes home to a compromised grandpa or grandma. That could be a perfect storm. That's not a good thing. So right. You make a very good point about making sure that our society, our humanity looks at where is your world at and how is it needing to be treated versus the NBA player. Because as you can imagine, I have heard more than my fair share of college athletes talk to me about, I'm so frustrated the NFL can do this or the NBA can do this, why can't we? Well, I've said pretty much what you said. You're not the NFL. You're not the NBA. You still have to answer to a parental unit or administrators or, your fellow students. You need to buck up and deal with that. Now, I can say that.
Back to the level of resources and the level of mitigation of transfer, right? So you can, I saw a picture of the Broncos walking through a mister prior to going out onto the field. Our schools are trying to figure out how to get the free and reduced lunches, right? Our schools are trying to figure out how to have transportation just to get to school every day. And so it's unrealistic to think that we can operate as a state with and compared to the level of resources that are available to our professional teams. I mean, nobody's going to go to Disney World and isolate all of the baseball players or all of the where they're all holed up right now. But a month ago or 2 months ago, they were all going to be in Arizona. And so, you know, everybody's continuing to find out what that is. And I go back to, you know, when we were trying to implement the state basketball tournament, I sent out a memo that said, hey, we're not going to shake hands. Make sure you wash your hands. So from March till now, we've become more educated, not only about our population now becoming more in the news about asymptomatic being transmitters, right? And back in March, it was like I was told by the department that side of safety for our kids and put athletics and activities into a perspective of privilege and participation, and not try to put it in the forefront of education and all of the things we're learning about the environments that our student athletes would be in.
Ronnie, you mentioned something about financial issues that are different from high school versus pros. That's a very good analogy, but I also want to make sure that we're not losing sight of the pressure on the financial capacity of high schools in being able to free and reduce lunches. You know, there's a change that's going on, and they don't have the capacity to give everybody a laptop to be able to then have the right amount and power of Wi-Fi at home. Some communities aren't, and families aren't equipped for that. So what have you heard, and how can I help you raise the awareness of financial needs with CHASA and or the high schools you support? Are there funding resources you need? Are there ways we can help?
You know, right now, obviously for us, we had a shutdown of our basketball tournament, which is probably one of our top 3 revenue streams that come in from ticket sales. I want to say this, my predecessors, the men that have sat in my seat prior to me were forward thinking in terms of not making the sustainability of our organization be solely dependent upon ticket sales. And that has trickled down through all of the leaders of CHASA. And so there's been other revenue streams that have been put into place to, you know, nobody knew it would be a pandemic. We always thought it would be a big snowstorm, right? Or something that would shut down the wrestling tournament or the basketball tournament. And so right now, as a state association, where we actually refunded all of the spring participation dues to our schools, which came out to probably about $250,000, right? And right now we're just trying to find out what that looks like. Obviously, I do budget projections. They're approved in March, not realizing what would happen, right, in spring. And so we're just right now we're getting our just thought process in place. I think we really won't see the implications until we finish out the 2021, right? Because right now there's no budget comparisons in terms of what that revenue stream would look like when you're not having a state football championship, you're not having a volleyball, you're not having soccer, which all tend to end up in the black. But we know that those are going to happen after January. So for us as a state association, to answer your question, we are just looking at data points to see where we would be at the end of 2021. So we're not looking for, we've applied for all government, opportunities as a 501c3. I think people sometimes believe that we are funded by the state. We are not. We are an independent association. And so therefore we don't get state funding for the operations of the state association. So we have some really strong corporate sponsors that have stayed on even when they didn't have the visibility that was part of their contractual or our contractual expectations this spring. And I would say 90% of them are staying on. And so we're not feeling that. But in terms of, like I said, 178 school districts, I think some of our school districts are doing fine. I think some of our school districts are struggling. And so CHASA doesn't really have that kind of information in terms of who we can help. We just know that our decisions and the way that we do business cannot put additional financial or administrative strain onto our schools as they try to get our kids back to education. And so that's what we have control over. So we've tried to eliminate any new programs, anything that would increase any types of dollars our schools would be putting in as voluntary members. So that is a great offer and a very kind offer, but I think we're all just trying to figure out where we are right now.
Well, I appreciate well, I've always appreciated your respect and respected you for your honesty and your tenacity for representing what the truth is, despite what others might say about it when it's stated. And the pandemic tends to bring a truth that it's hard to avoid seeing. It's just there. It's right there in front of your face, despite how aggressive some people have been trying to deny those self-evident natural truths. With that being said, I want to, again, thank you for your time, Rhonda. You've always been generous with that and informing my audience and informing me about what is necessary and important in reminding ourselves about how to keep kids participating in activities that help them become better citizens, as well as, too often athletics gets the major focus, but it's about participation. It's about making sure that they are actively engaged in things that will make them better as human beings and as citizens. Now, as I say that, I want to ask you to just share briefly, what is it that you're expecting and what kind of outcomes do you want to see going through the rest of this year that keep building you up and keep giving you that great foundation of hope for you?
Well, like you said, it's an internal mechanism. When you focus your professional career around what you know, because you sit in this chair as an example of what can happen when you have positive coaches in your life, positive educators in your life, the ability, if you have the athletic talent, to parlay that into education at the higher level, as well as competition and experiences across the world. It's just an internal, from your own personal experiences, as well as when you see those results in other kids that have been a part of CHASA events. And so I think what I feel like we've accomplished with the governor's response team and their collaborative efforts to get athletics and activities resumed, that our kids have hope. We're not reacting or we're not canceling anything. We have now, a 10-month period after January to make sure that our kids have these opportunities. So that's where the hope comes from, is I'm not sitting there waiting to send out an email saying that we've been shut down, right? And that is the sick feeling that I had all spring prior to that decision being made. So there's just the calendar speaks for itself, that we positioned all sports and activities to have a start to a season and a culminating event. And so I don't know that it requires much more than that to say, we're moving, we have you guys taken care of, and barring no resurgence in a pandemic, the adults in your lives are going to make this happen.
Rhonda Blanford Green, I just realized you're RBG. You're my RBG.
Yeah.
I always wish you the best. My heart goes out to you in the effort that you present to children and young people, and that they bring smiles to your face, my friend. Have a great day today.
Thank you so much, and I always appreciate our media partners for giving us a voice, so thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye now. All right, everybody, that was Rhonda Blanford Green, Executive Director of CHASA. As you heard, she's doing what is necessary to bring the activities and participation of our young people to a daily occurrence, as much as she can, given the certain health emergencies we have. Have a great day today. This is 360 Performance. I'm your host, Lowell Whiteman. Coach, helping you to have a great day and performing at your best every day. Take care.